Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into an incredibly rich conversation about Albert Camus' absolute masterpiece, The Plague. But hey, this isn't some dry history lesson. We're unpacking an imagined, fascinating roundtable discussion between 6 renowned Camus scholars and the author himself to uncover what this deeply moving, often unsettling novel means for our lives literally today. Let's get right into it.
Okay, so first things first, we have to confront the one massive question that readers have debated endlessly since the book was published. What exactly does the plague symbolize? It's like a giant puzzle. Everyone wants to crack it, stick a neat little label on it, and put the book away on a shelf. But as we're going to see, it's just not that simple.
Check out all these contradictory interpretations. Some people read the novel and say, oh, it's definitely an allegory for the German occupation of France. Others argue it's a literal biological epidemic, a massive meditation on death, the absurdity of the universe, or even the harsh realities of colonialism. The crazy part? The scholars point out that all of these are partially right, but if you rely on just one single answer, you trap this brilliant book in a single century. Camus himself actually hated the demand for a single answer because the true genius of the story is how it completely refuses to be pinned down.
Section 1. Beyond the epidemic, the many faces of the plague. Let's zoom out a bit and look at how this story of an outbreak in the city of Oran acts as a mirror for much larger societal forces.
The novel has this incredibly fascinating central tension. On one hand, Camus reaching for a universal truth. What do human beings actually owe each other when suffering becomes unavoidable? But on the flip side, scholars point out a pretty glaring historical blind spot regarding colonial Algeria. The book begs us not to ignore anyone's suffering, yet it leaves the indigenous Arab population entirely out of the frame. Now, recognizing this doesn't ruin the book. Actually, it's a profound reminder. It forces us to ask ourselves, who is missing from our own moral field today? Who do we fail to see?
Section 2. Absurdity and Action. Finding Meaning in Silence. This chapter is absolutely crucial for understanding how we're supposed to act when the universe gives us zero guarantees of justice or fairness. You know, people hear absurdism, and they immediately think, oh, that just means nothing matters. No way! That is a massive misunderstanding. The absurd isn't just an empty universe. As the scholars explain, it's the collision, the intense, sparking friction between our deep human hunger for order and meaning and the totally silent, indifferent reality we actually live in. It's what happens when we scream out for a cosmic guarantee and get absolutely nothing in return.
Look at the stark difference here between passive optimism and active hope. Optimism is kind of like this comforting little lie that things will just magically get better on their own. Hope, however, at least Camus' version of hope, is highly active. You act with fidelity way before you know if things will actually improve. Take Dr. Ryu in the novel. He wakes up every single day and treats the next patient, not because he knows the epidemic ends tomorrow, but simply because there is a human being suffering right in front of him. He refuses to surrender even without a safety net.
Section 3. The Plague Within. The Internal Contagion. Now we're turning inward to look at a deeply unsettling idea from the character Taro, the idea that everyone inherently carries the plague inside themselves.
The scholars really hammer home that evil doesn't always kick down your door looking like a monster. Most of the time, it spreads quietly. It slips in through everyday compromises, ordinary obedience, bureaucratic red tape, and our terrifying ability to just get used to the suffering of other people. It's the habit of excusing harm because it's convenient, or just because we desperately desire not to be troubled by the world's pain.
There's this brilliantly simple moment in the scholars' imagined debate about a leaky library roof. Water starts dripping, right? So everyone immediately jumps up to move the precious books out of the way. They manage the immediate damage. But here's the kicker. Nobody actually fixes the rotting roof. It perfectly and kind of absurdly shows how the plague operates in society. We'll do the bare minimum to relieve immediate discomfort, but completely ignore the deeper structural collapse. So, if we all carry this metaphorical plague, should we just sit around drowning in guilt? Absolutely not. Guilt is completely self-absorbed. It looks inward and keeps you frozen in place. Rather than being paralyzed by our complicity in broken systems, Camus urges us to embrace active responsibility. Responsibility moves outward. It asks, okay, what can I do right now? It's making that brave, intentional choice to step up and interrupt the harm.
Section 4. The Silence of God. Faith and Suffering. Let's shift gears and look at the massive tension between religious faith, crushing doubt, and the suffering of the innocent.
We see this tension beautifully play out through Father Panalou.
His journey is wild. In month 1 of the plague, he's up in his pulpit confidently preaching that the disease is a divine punishment for the city's sins. But then by month 10, he watches an innocent child die a heartbreaking death. It completely shatters all his neat theological explanations. By year 2, his second sermon is drastically different. He stops saying you deserve this and starts saying we must endure this together. He goes from judging the suffering to humbly joining it.
As the library attendant so profoundly points out during the debate, grief makes people speak different languages. Dr. Ryu speaks the language of medicine and rebellion, while Panelos speaks the language of prayer. But here's the thing. True moral fellowship doesn't mean they have to completely agree on theology. It just requires them not to abandon each other in the room while they're facing that shared suffering.
Section 5. The Modern Plague. The Habit of Unreality. For our final section, let's look forward and ask why this mid-20th century story feels more urgently relevant today than ever before.
Think back to the recent global pandemic. Did you feel that deep, bone-tiring exhaustion? When readers went back to Camus, they realized they weren't just reading about physical events, they were recognizing their own emotional stages. The early denial, the confusing bureaucratic jargon, the intense isolation, and especially the moral fatigue. People realized that their exhaustion wasn't a personal moral failure, it was just a deeply human emotional stage of surviving a long, grinding crisis.
And we can see how this builds into the broader crises of our time. To see how a modern societal plague takes hold today, whether it's political extremism or misinformation, we can track these exact steps. Step 1, language starts dehumanizing our neighbors. Step 2, institutions hide the real-world consequences behind procedure. And step 3, citizens decide they'd rather have the comfort of their tribe than face a hard truth.
The scholars argue that Camus' biggest warning for us today is this habit of unreality. We're seeing a growing preference for comforting narratives that protect our identities, instead of facts that actually demand our responsibility. Think about our digital isolation. Mass loneliness and the screens between us convince us that other humans are just abstractions. They become enemies in a comment section rather than flesh and blood neighbors. And that is exactly how the plague thrives today.
But there's a powerful antidote. We have to remain interruptible. We have to stay open to being interrupted by new evidence, by another person's actual suffering, and by the very real possibility that we might be wrong. We can never, ever let our personal ideologies, even the absolute most well-meaning ones, block our compassion for the actual person standing right in front of us.
Which brings us to an incredibly powerful conclusion that beautifully illustrates Camus' core message. You don't need to be a spotless, perfect hero. You just need to be someone who consistently, actively, and quietly chooses to limit the spread of cruelty in your own daily life.
To explore this incredible conversation and read in full, please visit https://imaginarytalks.com/The Plague Explained by Top Albert Camus Scholars. As we wrap up this explainer, I leave you with one final question to think about. What small act of vigilance will you choose to interrupt the plague today?